today's Patron exclusive episode about Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville, we're going to look at some newspaper articles that were written post-riot. The first thing we need to think about is newspapers during the time. Newspapers were basically similar to the way we consume media now. You have Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, Newsmax, and on and on and on. And most likely, each news outlet we consume our news from today has some sort of bias to it or some sort of affiliation with a party. Obviously, Fox News would be more right. MSNBC is going to be more left. And how you consume your news is completely up to you. But it's very similar to the times in 1850s. Instead of news channels, you had newspapers, and these newspapers supported different parties. And also, because we do not have digital access to the Louisville Journal papers, we have to look at other newspaper sources. And this is also similar to news today. Let's say you're watching the local Fox 56 in Lexington, Kentucky, and they have a news story. The same story may be presented in another Fox station in New York or Michigan or California. And this is true for all stations, NBC, ABC, and so forth. They all have their news affiliates, in a way, borrow stories from. And those are kind of the catchy, fun stories you might see, or even the more deadly, tragic stories you might hear about as well. The same rings true to newspapers. A newspaper in Washington, D.C., or a newspaper in Cincinnati or Columbus may take a newspaper clipping from a newspaper in Kentucky and then reprint it in their paper, and they would of course cite it and say this is from the Louisville Journal or so forth. So we have two newspaper articles today that I'm going to share with you that are post-riot. The first newspaper article comes from the Washington Sentinel, which was out of Washington, D.C., and it's from August 18th, 1855. So Bloody Monday happened on August 6th. So this is about 12 days after. Now this newspaper article quotes or takes an article from the Louisville Democrat. It's titled The Louisville Riots. And as you would expect, the message is being diluted or misrepresented or spun. So I'll begin with the first paragraph. The telegraphic reports from Louisville respecting the riots in the city are the grossest misrepresentations and falsehoods we ever read. We shall publish them in a few days, when we have gotten the true history of some transactions of which they refer. The lies told with a brazen effrontery that there was no disturbance at the polls. The mob started, according to the various reporters, by the Irish who pursued Burge in the upper part of the city, and it started in the 8th Ward by the Irish shooting down 2 peaceable citizens without provocation. Such stories may find credit abroad, where people know nothing of the conditions of things here. Now, this is from a Democratic newspaper, so obviously they're going to be anti-know-nothing, which is very important in this next paragraph. We intend to give the true history of these transactions from eyewitnesses. Our readers know that we anticipate disturbances, that the anti-know-nothing party made every effort for peace beforehand. They made propositions which would have prevented the disgrace of Louisville, but their proposals were spurned by a party that had other views and purposes. The Democrats have no part in the government of the city, judicial or administrative. The know-nothings had the business all in their own way, for they have performed their duty. The history of the last week will testify. The public will hold them a strict account for all the violence of the mob. We have heard of no arrest yet. Obviously, the Democrats are pointing the finger at the know-nothings because they had all the power in the Louisville government. But we continue. I find this one, I find the whole article very interesting. This next paragraph is very interesting as well. For all the violence of the mob, we have heard of no arrest yet, except of poor Germans or Irish who were beaten and terrified and exasperated into indiscretions, or who were beaten and abused without cause. The hundreds of bullies with clubs at the polls, beating legal voters away, came and went unmolested. It may be a matter of wonder that such things could go on for a whole day and even begin the next day here in Louisville. We can only say that the preparations were too well made, and there was no organization to prevent its objects. Individuals did what they could. Some of the American party tried to stop or mitigate these outrages. When they could not stop them, for party managers had raised a storm they could not control. This paragraph is pointing that no arrests had even been made, that just the only people that had been arrested were Germans and Irish. Rumors, utterly false, of the most exciting sort were raised by the men who were themselves the guilty, which completely deceived and misled men who were desirous of peace and crippled their efforts. Thus deeds of violence and blood went on. It's interesting to note that the finger pointing is going on very much, that they're saying that the American party could have stopped this, but it got to the point that it was out of control, and therefore they couldn't stop it, which holds some truth, I believe, because the mayor did step in at one point to prevent the burning of a cathedral. Very interesting article. The article continues, and it goes on to say, it is now established beyond a doubt that the whole blame of the election riots is to be charged to the know-nothings, saying that they had men on Sunday night who surrounded the entrance in such a manner as to prevent all from entering who did not show the indications or signs agreed upon. So imagine this, you walk up to a polling place and you have to give a certain sign in order to vote, because then they know that you're going to be voting for the know-nothing candidates. It also goes on to say that the police have been appointed to keep down and prevent any such occurrences, were actually leaders in many instances of the know-nothing party. The rest of this article goes on and really just casts the know-nothings with 100% of the blame, which in my opinion is very truthful. They did pretty much cause all this. Now, as I went on to reading, the next paragraph says foreigners removing from Louisville. And this goes and supports the thought that Bloody Monday decreased the immigration population and the progress of Louisville versus Cincinnati and let's say St. Louis. Foreigners removing from Louisville. The Louisville Times of the 12th instant says, numbers of foreign citizens continue to leave the city, and many others are preparing to sell their property and leave. We heard one of the most respectful citizens of Jefferson County say yesterday, as soon as he could sell his city property and farm, he designed to leave the state. Cannot businessmen see that this state of things is destructive of the city? That's a pretty compelling paragraph, and a pretty good look at what it was like after the riots. This next article is very interesting, and it is from the Daily Union from Washington, D.C., and it was August 16th, 1855, so about 10 days after. Now their excerpt is from the Louisville Journal. It's titled, Threat of a Know-Nothing Editor, and its editor would be George Prentice. The Louisville Journal notices that a number of its subscribers have stopped their papers in consequence of its course on the recent riots in the city, and remarks. So this is what the journal says to those people who are stopping their subscriptions to the paper. We never censor men for withdrawing their names from our subscription books. Those, however, who choose to proscribe us because we will not throw upon our party, the American party, more blame than it deserves, may perhaps pardon us for suggesting to them that, if we choose to publish their names, they might feel an incomparable heavier weight of proscriptions than they are capable of making us feel. Sounds a bit like a threat. But they're upset because people are unsubscribing to their paper because they feel the Louisville Journal is part to blame. The article goes on to say, the threat contained in the above cannot be mistaken. It means that those who do not approve of robbery, arson, and murder, when committed in the name of the know-nothingism, must effectually stifle all emotions of horror or indignation which crimes of so deep a dye are calculated to call forth. The rest of the article goes on to talk about how basically supporting the Louisville Journal after these remarks is kind of crazy, because after they made the threat as well that they would call you out if you quit subscribing to them, that you basically supported the riots, they should stand up against the threats by George Prentice. I hope these articles have enlightened us a little bit about the Bloody Monday of Louisville. I will continue to search for some more that will help us paint a better picture of what went down on August 6th. But the next video I'm going to put out for Patrons is going to be one focused on George Prentice. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.